You wake up, your eyes are open, you can see the room, but you cannot move. Not a hand, not even a finger. No matter how hard you push from the inside, you feel awake and aware. For a few seconds, sometimes longer, a fully conscious mind is trapped inside a body that has simply stopped answering. The room around you is the one you fell asleep in. Same shapes, same gray light at the curtain's edge. This isn't a dream you're remembering. It's happening right now. And there is a name for exactly what your brain just did to you. It's called sleep paralysis, and it isn't rare, and it isn't a malfunction unique to you. Researchers Brian Sharpless and Jacques Barber pooled 35 studies, 36,533 people total, across general population samples, college students, and psychiatric patients. The number depends on who you ask. In general population samples covering 18,330 people, the estimated lifetime prevalence was 7.6%, roughly 1 person in 13. Separate pooled estimates were about 28% in student samples and 32% in psychiatric samples. Whatever just happened to you in that bed has already happened, in close to the same form, to millions of strangers. To see why, look at what your brain does every night without you noticing. During REM sleep, the stage of the most vivid dreaming, neurons in the brainstem release the inhibitory chemicals glycine and GABA onto the motor neurons that drive your muscles. Those inhibitory pathways sharply reduce tone in most voluntary skeletal muscles. In a healthy cycle, that reduction is doing you a favor. It keeps you from physically acting out whatever your dreaming brain is doing. But how many separate systems have to fail at once for that shutdown to misfire? Researchers Patricia Brooks and John Peaver went looking for an answer. They worked with rats, and they targeted one specific site, the trigeminal motor nucleus, the cluster of neurons that controls the jaw muscles. There they tried switching REM paralysis off, one receptor system at a time. Blocking the glycine receptors alone didn't restore muscle tone. Blocking the fast-acting GABA-A receptors alone didn't either. Only when they blocked all three, glycine, GABA-A, and a slower-acting receptor called GABA-B, together did masseter muscle tone return. This was a rat study in one muscle group, and the researchers don't claim that same three-way overlap runs the rest of the human body, but it points to REM paralysis not being controlled by a single switch. Sleep paralysis happens when that timing slips, and it can slip in two different directions. At sleep onset, the muscle shutdown can begin before your awareness has fully faded, so you're still lying there, aware as your body powers down around you. On waking, it runs the other way. Your conscious mind can switch back on before the shutdown has fully lifted. You surface into awareness while the body is still running last night's software. Either direction produces the same experience from the inside, a clear mind inside a body that hasn't caught up yet. Can this be produced on purpose? Researchers have tried. In one study, 16 people who already experienced recurring sleep paralysis had their sleep deliberately interrupted at specific points in the cycle, across multiple nights. Out of 64 separate interruption attempts, 6 produced a recorded episode of sleep paralysis, about 9.4% of trials. That's not nothing. It means sleep paralysis can be triggered under controlled lab conditions, at least in people already prone to it, but it also means it isn't reliable. Most attempts, even in that group, did not produce sleep paralysis. The paralysis alone would be strange enough. Many people report additional sensations layered on top of it. In Chain and colleagues' survey data, the reported features tended to load onto 3 overlapping dimensions: a sensed presence, pressure on the chest and difficulty breathing, and floating or out-of-body sensations. The first is a sensed presence, the feeling that something is in the room, watching, sometimes with shadowy figures or footsteps. The second is pressure on the chest and trouble breathing, the pattern behind centuries of something sat on me. The third is floating, spinning, the sensation of leaving the body entirely. Fear ran through many of the reports as well. 3 overlapping dimensions, showing up again and again in the survey data. Why the brain reaches for a sensed presence specifically is still an open question. Psychologist Alan Chain proposed one possible answer, a theoretical model he called a threat-activated vigilance system. The idea is that paralysis plus consciousness plus darkness plus total physical vulnerability together switch on an old alarm, tuned to a much simpler risk, something in the dark and you unable to run. Wired into a body that cannot move, that system wouldn't be finding evidence of anything. It would be manufacturing the feeling regardless. This is a proposed model, not a confirmed mechanism. Nobody has proven the brain actually works this way, but it would explain why the fear feels aimed at something, even when nothing is there. This experience has been described across cultures for centuries under very different names. In Japan, Kanashibari, bound as if in chains. In Newfoundland, the Old Hag, who sits on the sleeper's chest. In Brazil, the pisadeira, a long-nailed crone who tramples the sleeping. Elsewhere, a ghost, a spirit, a djinn. Researchers have documented sleep paralysis-like folklore in more than 100 cultural settings, although this is not an exhaustive world count. One of the more detailed studies comes from Japan. A 1987 survey of 635 university students found about 40% had experienced Kanashibari, and roughly half of those episodes were preceded by something the student could point to: stress or a disrupted sleep schedule. Different centuries, different continents, strikingly similar descriptions. So here's what this research can tell you and what it can't. Sleep paralysis can occur on its own, and it can also occur as one feature of narcolepsy. Distinguishing those situations requires a broader clinical picture that this video cannot provide. By itself, an isolated episode does not establish a disorder. In one large retrospective survey of over 6,000 people, lying on the back was reported for sleep paralysis episodes 3 to 4 times as often as for ordinary sleep onset, an association from self-reported memory, not a study that tracked people through the night. Disrupted sleep and stress show up repeatedly in this research too, though most of it is correlational rather than causal. An isolated episode is generally considered benign in an otherwise healthy sleeper. When episodes are frequent, though, or bring on real distress, clinical researchers treat that as a different picture, one that calls for a closer look than a video can give. This isn't a checklist to diagnose yourself from. It's simply what the research can and cannot distinguish. So the next time you wake up and for a few seconds cannot move, here's what the research describes. 2 systems, sleep and waking, that don't always switch on and off in step. A mind back online, inside a body where REM-related atonia has not yet lifted. It has a name. It has been measured and produced, though not reliably, under lab conditions. It has been described in many cultures worldwide. The experience itself isn't evidence of anything in the room with you. What it is evidence of is a seam, a brief gap where the part of you that dreams and the part of you that wakes haven't quite lined back up. And then, almost always they do, and let you go.